Directed and co-written by Brandon Christensen, we are talking Night of the Reaper. And this is a 2025 slasher movie that is kind of inspired by movies like Scream, although it does actually take place in the 1980s. And it's a movie which is trying to have those kind of nostalgia feels, ultimately. It has quite a fun little kind of elements like VHS kind of lines and things like this in the kind of the intro of the movie, stuff like that. So it's very much a kind of retro style of film. And the story is this kind of small American town has been plagued by a killer. Now, the police don't really realise that there is an actual sort of serial killer or slasher. A lot of these killings look like they've been made to look like accidents. Not all of them, but some. And as such, the clues haven't been put together. But this killer is out and about, and it follows two separate protagonists. We have the local sheriff, who keeps getting delivered clues as to what's kind of going on, and he's kind of on the hunt. And then we have this college-age girl who has come back home and ends up babysitting for a gig that her friend had because her friend had the Jimmy Smiths. So our main female antagonist is kind of filling in for her, and she's babysitting the sheriff's young son. So the movie oscillates between these two characters as the police chief is trying to uncover the clues, find out what's kind of going on, who may be involved, and this babysitter is having encounters with the killer. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's talk about it in a nice spoiler-free way. Alright. I say spoiler-free because this movie does have a few kind of like left turns and a few kind of like elements that will be surprising for you. So, you know, we'll kind of keep the surprise if you haven't sort of seen it. What I will say on the positive side, I actually think the kind of the twists where it's going are reasonable. I feel it's sort of without giving any really hint to what's going on, but you know, it's maybe a twist like we've seen in the movies like Scream and things like that, but it's maybe a twist that is a little more unique in a way, which I kind of quite liked. The next thing I would say is I think this movie has a good 80s vibe to it. I think, you know, I'm of a certain age. I remember the 80s, and I quite enjoyed these kind of retro throwback movies that have reverence for this kind of time in history. And I think it does a reasonable job without really bashing you over the head with it, of this movie being set in the 80s with this kind of things like technology and stuff like that, to a degree at least. So that I all quite like, the kind of the music choices and things like this. So yeah, it's a kind of a fun like nostalgia trip. I mean, obviously the 80s were full of kind of slasher movies, and this is obviously, I mean, it feels more like a 90s slasher movie, to be honest. But you know, nonetheless, it's still of that broad area of time, and I don't think it does a good job of kind of capturing those that sort of nostalgic feel, be it 80s or probably more 90s if you want my honest opinion. I think the acting here is all good. I think the cast do a good job of making engaging characters. As I say, the movie has a relatively large cast, but it really focuses in on two characters, of which I think, you know, you get a good sense of kind of who they are to a point with one of them at least. And you know, you care for these characters, you kind of root for the characters, and the movie has this kind of mystery feel to a degree where, you know, we are learning as sort of characters find out that these killings that maybe the townsfolk had thought were not murders and were just accidents, maybe were murders and things. And, you know, that kind of realisation and kind of putting the clues together you know, we are learning at the same time as characters on screen, which makes for, you know, a sort of an intriguing movie. There's plenty of like stalking in this film. I do feel sometimes with like slasher films in particular, there's filmmakers have a tendency, sometimes at least, to not have a build-up and kind of like rely maybe more on jump scares and things like this. But I do feel this movie does a fairly good job of like building up this, like there's someone out in the dark and things like this. I mean, yeah, there are a couple of jump scares and stuff, but you know, I have to say, I still think that the kind of the atmosphere building was quite strong in this movie, and it's, you know, it's a competently made movie. I think it's, you know, it feels like effort has been put into the production. It feels like care has been taken whilst making this, and that comes across on screen, I have to say. Do I have any negatives? And again, spoiler free here, so it might be vague. I do think that there are elements here that I feel do drag, particularly the police investigation. I think that sort of storyline, because we're sort of going between these two stories, and in a way the police one is less interesting to a degree because it doesn't have that sort of edge of your seat kind of element that the other one does. It therefore is a little less interesting, and you know, you kind of feel like those scenes maybe drag out a little bit. Maybe we didn't need the kind of the split 50-50 in a way, in regards to kind of like screen time, because those scenes do drag a little bit. There are some sort of elements here that I feel are a little unbelievable and over the top. And again, you'll have to forgive me for being vague because I don't want to have any spoilers. But there are people involved who seem to be genius level criminologists, at the same time being ninjas that can move without sound and seemingly get around a house that's quiet. Obviously we're hearing music as the film is playing, but if you think the character, there's not like music playing or anything, seemingly is able to get around, move stuff, set up sort of like taunts to torture victims without making a sound, without seemingly kind of ever getting seen, things like this. So the kind of the physics of how this kind of, you know, antagonistic force might be kind of getting around there, even some of the protagonistic forces, I've got to say, is a little bit hard to swallow at times. Next thing I would say is motivation. You know, why are people doing certain things? We get the answer for some, but not for others. And I have to say, we get our reveal of maybe who the killer will be, but I didn't really get the why, if I'm honest. Why this killer is doing what they are doing. It never really seemed particularly that was ever sort of even touched upon, I have to say. So I think this movie is more interested in delivering like an interesting, it's an interesting twist than actually having a movie which is, you could kind of say, okay, you know, that's a relatively kind of like realistic look at a home invasion slash kind of serial killer slasher type film, because it just seems to me to be a little bit unbelievable and arguably a little bit silly at times, I've got to say. You know, and I've said this with another movie that I reviewed recently in regards to the identity of the killer, but we have we introduce a character that doesn't really have much to do in regards to the story, and you're thinking, okay, well, why have we cast a recognisable character actor and have them show up and do things without really having any impact on the story as a whole? Surely they're going to come back and have some impact later on. So, you know, again, it's a problem for these type of films. I will say this is a 6 out of 10 for me. It's an above average kind of slasher movie. It's maybe too similar to the likes of Scream and that ilk of movies, but it's a watchable film and it's well made and well acted. 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.